Good day to all of you. This is my first video lecture in EDUC 801. And I'm going to have you focus on understanding the concept about design thinking and regenerative design thinking. This first 2 weeks, when you went into the course, I particularly have a sequence of videos that I asked you to watch, plus the video in the information section that was Bill Reed's conversation about what regenerative design is about. So make sure you listen to that if you have not, or refresh your thinking about it. And then I have the 4 behaviors of innovative leaders. And then a very important one is the George Kimball one related to emergent behaviors and why they become important in thinking about actually the development of emergent leadership as it relates to the concepts of innovation, creativity, and design. So make sure you look at that. And then Sir Ken Robinson's ideas about what the nature of the creating a new normal in terms of learning environments. And then coupled to that is obviously Carol Sanford, where she basically gets you to understand the differences, I believe, in terms of what design thinking is and human-centered design versus a regenerative life design process. So I just want to make sure that you understand I have these particular videos there for you to help get you into an understanding of what you will be doing. So with that, let me get started with my presentation. And I do want to alert you to the first assignment that you will be doing within your teams related to this matrix. And I will talk about it in more detail in week 3. But what I want you to do as you begin to think about these 3 or 4 structures, the structure of social justice, the structure of schools, healthcare, and work, I'd like you, as I said, to look at them in relationship to the 7 first principles. So go back to Carol's book and read through pages 24 to 32 to reintroduce yourself to what these are and to see how your learning team can begin to at least show some of the concepts, how they play out within these 4 areas of the matrix. And if you're really not sure, after you look at this, put a question mark to it. And then when I get this from a team and I come into the teams and talk about it, I'll be able to go a little bit deeper into this. And then coupled to this, which makes this a little bit different because we are looking at the present structure of schooling within a community. What I'd like you to do then is also now to go a little bit deeper into the structures of schooling that you started playing around with in 845, but particularly I want you to think about how a curriculum is structured, how the schedule is structured, work procedures, classroom design, contractual arrangements, and the technologies that are there, and then identify what you believe are the paradigms. So remember the 4 paradigms, starting with value return to the regenerative life. So I'd like you to do that because what that's going to do is honestly is to help your team to begin to conceptualize the current reality that is in place with the systems that are within the community that you're going to pick specifically where this is going to take place, and your own experiences, whether you are presently within a K-12 environment, but then go back and think about if you have children within those systems, think about what they were experiencing. And then if you don't have that, go back to your own experiences, kind of image those, bring them up, to the way in which you went through a school system and how you interacted with the curriculum and the technology and contracts and all those other things. So that's what you're going to be doing in this to help stimulate your understanding of the structures within any given environment. So I'll have more about this, but I just wanted to make sure that you have a sense of what this is going to be, and what you're going to produce by the end of the assignment time that I have for this. Now, what I want you to think about is, so as you begin to look at this idea of problem-based design thinking, where you begin to look at an issue within an environment that needs to be solved. So you begin to define it. And then the second stage that you generally will learn about is now you're going to spend time with the people that allows you to deeply engage with and learn from them based upon understanding what the problem is and what needs to be solved in terms of the creative process, which then leads to the team ideating, where there you're forming ideas and consider the many divergent options that are possible for you to try to solve or mitigate this particular problem. And then what the team will do is prototype. And that really what prototyping is about is not to create a working model, but it's to give form to those ideas that you're doing in the ideation process. So this is important. Now, if we were working in a face-to-face environment, what I would have you do is basically build the prototype with your hands, utilizing, artifacts to demonstrate what this evolution of a learning environment might look like. But again, prototyping is to get out the ideas out of the abstract into some concrete form, and that you're constantly doing that, as you will learn and read in the Kelly brothers. What they basically say is that your idea, through the ideation process coupled to the prototyping, what you're trying to prototype is go as fast as you can so that you can fail enough times to begin to understand the possibility of how your prototype needs to evolve. And then the final thing is that you test it out. You do a small test within the environment, which then will lead to the possibilities of making this be able to work within the system that you are utilizing design thinking for. So I just want to make sure that you understand this. Some of you probably have already done this or doing it within your environments, but this is the structure of what design thinking is about. Now, what regenerative design is, and this is why I want you to make sure you listen to Bill Reed's presentation that I had in the course information. But again, what Carol talks about is that problem solving is by definition focused on addressing what exists. But innovation comes from potential. And so if you think about the U, that at the bottom of the U, why you were learning to understand to let go, to let come, is that the idea there of letting come is potentiality. And so when you look at that as the question that I want your teams to really look at, how does a school system, and start shifting towards a learning environment, move towards a regenerative design process? And so again, go to the paradigm of what regenerative life is about, or listen to what Bill Reed talks about in terms of the stories of communities that he's working with or has worked with that utilizes a regenerative design process, which incorporates what's called integrated design. So remember that potential is what this is about. It's evolving the capacity of a living system. And the reason I'm getting you to think about a learning environment as a living system is because what it is that is nothing more than the patterns of relationships of humans within that space that you're creating, which is nested within an ecological system called a community that interacts with both living and non-living systems. So I'm trying to get you to understand that the more you think from this point of view, it's going to give you greater leverage as a leader as you entertain change processes within your organizations or within your community. So remember, it's not problem focused, but on understanding how essence, potential, and capability is needed for a shift in your thinking, which then once you understand that, then you create the spaces for that to happen within the community you're talking about. So that's a framework around this idea of the regenerative design. And so when you're thinking about design from this point of view, utilizing these two, the design thinking process basically is that it's about believing that we can make a difference and having intentional processes to allow for relevant solutions to create a positive impact to an issue or a problem that you're looking at. And therefore, what happens out of that is basically the idea of problem solving. And problem solving is based in the paradigm of arrest disorder because we're trying to fix something. Now, there could be some do good involved in that because you're trying to arrest the disorder from a perception of doing good. But it's basically, as I stated before, is that it is dealing with the here and now and possibly in terms of the past, but not really necessarily looking at potential, because the regenerative process is really looking at, you know, a unique and specific potential of a given situation to develop the capacity to bring this potential forward, to make it become manifested within the environment in which you're working in, which really then leads into this idea of develop capacity from the point of view of really looking at what is the potential that we are seeing within this community, and therefore what the paradigm really you're working from is the regenerative life paradigm. So I just wanted to create this visual so that within your teams, you can begin to explore where you are in relationship individually and then collectively as you focus on the project that I have in front of you. So to do this is that designing for the future, what I want you to begin to think about is the work of Bill Sharp and this idea of the 3 horizons, and then how they relate to those nodal roles for a healthy society. And also to what Yuval Harari is talking about in the 21 lessons for the 21st century. So these are the intersects of the tools to help you as a team to process your innovation and your creativity as you're attempting to understand how do we re-image what learning environments within a community need to look like. And so this the idea of the 3 horizons, and you will have in the 3rd week, you'll listen to Bill Sharp as he talks about this, but basically what the 3 horizons are all about, very simplistic process to get you to look at. And so what Sharp says is that what happens is that we're dealing with the present and we're looking at the present, and then we look at the transition then into the future. That's what we're playing around with. And I'm getting you in a very simplistic and a very condensed way to begin to explore how the team, your team that you're in, begins to understand and can feel what this is like in order to develop the skills to go into your own environments. And so what happens is in terms of the first horizon. So really what he really says is that the first horizon really from this point of view is the status quo. It's current reality. It's what's taking place, how we're presently operating. And that's why when you look at in 845, what the current reality within those four, in the matrix that had those four systems within a community, and having you now look at those four systems from the point of view of the 7 first principles, the question now is, how does the status quo interact in terms of our current reality? So, for example, as I've said to you, when you think about schooling, and that includes the K-12 environment, that includes much of the university environments. So I want you to look at that from the perspective of from the perspective of how you experience what those learning environments are within the communities that you presently live in. Because you're a taxpayer, you're paying money for it, or you have kids in the system, what's the status quo? So that's what First Horizon is looking at. And then out of the creativity process, and this is where that interaction comes about, is Horizon 3, because what Horizon 3 is really looking at is possibilities, potential. So here you begin to say, here's what we've let go to let come. And as you chart that out over time, here's the curve upwards, so you can see what happens to Horizon 1 over time versus Horizon 2. So it gives you this visualization. Then in the meantime, though, is what has to happen is this concept of Horizon 2. And what he shows in terms of Horizon 2 is basically this. This is the innovation curve. This is where the zone of innovation takes place. This is where you try stuff fails, you learn from the failures, other things go. But what happens then over time is that the innovation then begins to allow for the manifestation of 3, and then the status quo, the present status quo, actually then gets mitigated. It gets changed. And so this is a way of thinking about, what the future is and getting you to organize the ideas. And you'll see a video in week 3 of Sharp talking about this as he utilizes it in a workshop that he's running. And then I'll have some additional information for you about how to utilize this, what are the strategies there. But I just wanted to give you a framework for thinking about the future. And also I have other frameworks for thinking about the ideation process that are in the handbook. So those are available also for you. Now, what happens is, as you begin to think about, what this is about, the idealized redesign, that an idealized redesign of a system is though you are designing it as though it's already in place. So, as a designer would replace the existing system right now as though it's already in place. So Russell Ackoff, who is considered one of the major thinkers in design thinking. He was at the Wharton School. He was an architect, but very famous in relationship to developing what systems thinking is about. And he's worked with Greenberg in developing an interesting book called Learning Right Side Up, on how he and Greenberg, envisioned the changes that are necessary, or the evolution of schooling within a given community or environment. But I think this is important for you to think about as you begin to look at the assumptions that I'm recommending you to think about about redesigned schools, and I'm utilizing the word school right now, nested in its community, that these are some of the assumptions that need to emerge. And number one, right off the bat, is that we need to understand new patterns of relationships among the people who are within the structure of the learning environment, but also its relationship to the community and how it interacts. So as you see that last bullet, I have the community becomes the classroom. What does that mean? What about the professional learning is continuous because of the nature of the shift in the mindsets that are going to be necessary? Well, how do we rethink those present concepts of what teaching and learning is about? What about students and teachers engaged in fewer separate classes per day? What happens when we have a less fragmented curriculum? And what new forms of assessment are going to emerge? Because again, remember from the paradigm of value return is that that is critical in terms of community that is helping to pay for what the emergence of this new framework that your team is going to create. So these are some things I would like you to explore. So overall then, once the possible idea is developed, now, as I said to you in 845, we spent time on the left side of the U. Now we're beginning to look at the right side of the U, which starts with the co-presencing. That's what your team is all about. It now goes into co-creation, co-evolving. So these are the processes of going up the right side or the right side of the U. And so what's going to happen then is the key is to understand the relationship between divergent and convergent thinking. That becomes important because when you begin to think about the difference between these two, and what's important about this is that most of the systems that you're working in right now are focused on convergent thinking. Because what divergent is all about is the concept of the many diverse and novel alternatives. You're looking at flexibility and elaboration and originality. That's what it is. So it's to nurture the emergence of the creative process that's coming out of the interaction of your team, and where that starts and why in the first couple of weeks I have you looking at some of the videos, I have you looking at the data that I have in those research tabs that are there for you to look at the Wall Street Journal material, to look at videos that I have in there to get you to stretch your thinking in relationship to what a learning community can become. And then what you then do is interact with convergent thinking. So here you're developing, prioritizing, you're screening. So, a team that's only focused on divergent thinking will never get anything done. A team that is totally is on convergent thinking is only going to keep repeating over and over again the status quo. So that's why the interaction of this becomes important for you, that you nurture within your environments and you nurture within the team the interaction of these two. So this becomes an important concept in relationship to developing your understanding of what creativity is about. And then when you look at the Puccio book, particularly how he and his team gives you the different frameworks that you're able to utilize with this creative process. So the tools are there. That's why I have you looking at the Puccio book. But when you look at what Yuval Harari is presenting for you, those 21 lessons, they become important to help nurture the emergence of that divergent thinking, because that's where the concept of Horizon 3 really comes into play. And then what the Kelly book helps you to understand and gives you stories about creative process, that creativity is not something that's just limited to artists and musicians, etc., that it is all part of us. It's all in us. And I think that's something I want you to think about when you looked at the George Kimball concept of this idea of emergence, that there seems to be a developing theory around how emergence and the unpredictability of biological processes within us allows for the development and the self-organizing process of life to continue, which then means that our metaphors of what systems look like needs to move from that mechanistic, deterministic approach to one that is open to self-organizing possibilities. So this, I think, becomes important for the team to begin to think about. And as you look at some of the videos and some of the readings that I have for you, hopefully this will become more, important to you, particularly as you talk about this within your teams. And then when I come into your teams, we can expand it even more. So really, when you think about what you were dealing with in 845, the idea of developing empathy and caring, and that one of the components to the design process is empathy, which is also extremely important in the area of the regenerative design process. That what happens here is that really why caring becomes important for you to care about the particular community that your team will look at, even though you don't live in that particular community, how you develop a caring for it. Because if you were, let's say, a consulting team or a design team coming into that community, that what you will have to do is to care through understanding the community around this idea of empathetically listening to the community, which then you are really focused on developing the capacity of the individuals within that community and to develop their essence of who they are. So that, to me, becomes a very important leadership component that hopefully, as I create this space for your learning, that you begin to understand and can allow that to, over time, manifest in who you are. So to do this really requires a couple things, and one is generosity, one is selflessness, and how they come out then is keeping an eye on the larger cells that you are growing into collectively as a team, and to dedicate yourself to helping the community's children that you are focused on in this particular assignment to build capacity that this growth will require. Okay, so that's important. And when you look at these slides that I will have for you, keep that in mind, because the idea of why you are learning to go down the left side of the U is really to get you to become empathetic to the environment in which you are operating in, which then allows for the possibility, as I said, for generative conversations to begin to emerge. And that's where that letting go to let come comes about. So a way of looking at this from a visual point of view is that how the regenerative design will work for educators, and all of us are educators. I don't care if you are in the business world, you're still educators. You're nurturing capacity within your roles. But in terms of the way of thinking about this project I have you doing is that learning environments are focused on developing the essence of students and adults within the community system. Okay? You're not just looking at kids here, you're looking at all humans who occupy that community, which then basically leads to, particularly to a specific beneficiary, are the learners who are there. Now, these could be intergenerational. They don't have to be children. They can be how the adults interact with kids in terms of learning within the community itself, which then, as you begin to think about this, is that the learners individually and collectively gain new capacities. And those capacities are designed to allow the essence of who they are as individuals to emerge, which then allows then overall is that the result in their essence contribution to the system's actualization within the community. So again, when you begin to think about the systems that are in this space, that in this community that you're picking out, obviously in a traditional sense, there's school systems, there's health systems, there's religious systems, there's family systems. You can keep expanding those out. But this is what you are exploring as you go through this process. So the fundamental design questions, basically, as you think about, the metaphor of the iceberg, what are we experiencing in terms of this community? What are dynamics there? Now, what's happening, what beliefs and assumptions are presently there, and what the tension then that will create the shift in thinking that comes about is in terms of this, what's the wholeness that this current reality presents in understanding what a learning environment is itself. So as you look at the wholeness of the system or the community that this is nested in, what potential does it give? Or are you just looking at it from the point of view that it is status quo and it's fragmented and that the belief structures are really a collection of its parts, and that's what it is, and that we keep looking at these things separately. So that's the desired future. The dichotomy, I guess one would say, is that how is your design either leading to the wholeness and the potential of this, or is it just going to allow for the same old, same old? So that's why I have you looking at horizon, at the horizon processes, because when you look at horizon 1 and you look at the present structure, and I'm just going to focus on K-12, but I also could put, the first 4 years of college or university in this. And so what becomes important about this is that there's an underlying assumption in most communities about their schools is that, it is really to educate individuals within society, to prepare and qualify them for work in an economy. Because again, think about the focus on STEM and what we're doing, as well as to integrate people into society and teach them values and morals of the society. So the role of education is the means to socialize individuals. Now, I want you to think about that in terms of current reality, particularly, I know in the state of Pennsylvania, state of Florida, every state, the emergence of concepts of, transgender ideas that are impacting school systems right now, or banning books, burning books, or rethinking, history from a state point of view that does not allow for diversity of thought. So again, think about these assumptions that are present there, because this gentleman here by the name of Robert Fritz always said, and it's very important, that if we fail to understand the powerful nature of a structure, we are less able to create new and desired outcomes. So that's why I'm having you look at the matrix again, look at what you did in 845, and begin to think about these structures and what are the behaviors that will emerge because of those structures. So that's an H1 process. That's what I'm having you do. So again, so the operational paradigm, really, if you think about it, and you can disagree with me or agree with me on this, is really arrest disorder. Because there's a mess around us, we got to focus on stopping from getting it worse. And depending on the political environment with any given community, that can range from many different voices and issues within that. But really what we're trying to do is to, increase the efficiency by measuring the objectives and goals, and that we're going to control kids in a way that we're going to segregate them into fragmented, areas. We might have tracking systems. We might have advanced programs. We might have, programs for kids who, really don't care about learning anything. So that's where the arrest disorder comes into play. But in schools, we try to fix kids who are in trouble. That's what that paradigm's about. What can this lead to? Ask, how can we get better value for return? That's what communities want to know. If you're a taxpayer, you know that. You want to know where your money's going. I know the majority of my property tax goes to my school system. That's what it's about. That's how our systems work. So I want you to think about the operational paradigm that is present within learning within a community, which is nested in these things that we call schools today. All right. So again, when you begin to look at the task in front of you, you think about Ari Degas, who wrote the book, The Living Company, back in the late 90s. Why do we fail to see the future? This is what he says. We fail to understand collective intelligence. We're highly fragmented right now. We are, if you think about what you read in The Righteous Mind, that's why there is no collective intelligence at this point. Look at what goes on in our government right now. We're faced with possible shutdown of our government because there's no collective intelligence. There's no interaction. There's no compromise. There's no understanding of the common good. So what the mind has not experienced before, it cannot see. That, I told you, is one of the problems of the reform movement or changing schools, is that we're all products of it. And that's all we know. And that there's where the voice of judgment, voice of cynicism, voice of fear comes into community members as, you're trying to create new possibilities of designs of schooling. You're going to run into those things. And again, remember, Heifetz and Linsky particularly, deep change is emotionally difficult. It's hard, and that we fail to have a memory of the future, that we do not nurture the development of creativity in our schools and in our kids and in our communities. So these I would like you to think about in relationship to what you are doing. And that, remember, this idea of structure affects the behavior of people over time. That was the mantra out of 800. That structure is shaped by, though, the mindsets and the worldview that people have. So there's kind of a feedback loop that takes place. That we create these structures because these structures come out of that. And I think I gave you an 845 that the structure of schooling that was created, 130 some years ago, came out of a worldview of the development of standardization to be able to work in factories. So that came out of the 1890s, and that structure is still prevalent today. So keep that in mind as you allow yourselves to let go. And I'm telling you now that you will become immersed in your own fear and your own cynicism of how to move something in this thing that I'm having you do. So be aware of that. Be conscious of that. That to me becomes very important, because change is difficult because of the influence of, this idea of no memory of the future. So as your team begins to work on this, please keep these ideas, in mind. So some things to look at. So when you're trying to reimagine the places you live, work, and educate, realize potential, what am I really working on? So think about that in relationship to where you presently live, in the community that you live in. And how can my work shift to focus on transforming and regenerating wholeness in my present if you're working in a school system, in my present school system, or if you're working in a university, the present university environment, or if you are, you work in the construction field, or you're a person who works in, outside of the educational field. Think about how you can regenerate the system that you're in, or lead that, or begin to get people to think about it by developing potential. So these two things, keep in mind. I want you to personalize this. I want you to think about this from that point of view. So finally, what becomes important about this idea is, the challenge for your team then is, how do we redesign learning, in a given community that's going to meet the needs of particularly the young people within that community for the world in which they're going to move into? How are they going to create their own future and beyond? And then the last thing is, remember that deeper change that you are going to initiate in relationship to conversation really creates the greatest danger for those who do lead. So what I've given you here, I'm hoping is, a better understanding of what, the design process is, the difference between what, the design thinking process that's really based on problems, versus a regenerative design process, which is based on potentiality. So I'd like you to keep that in mind. So I hope that this introductory video at least gives you a framework for understanding this space that I've created for all of you, and what you're going to be working on within your teams. So as usual, if you do have any questions or issues that we need to look at, obviously we'll talk about these within your team meetings when I jump into those. Remember to get me when your meetings will be meeting, or your teams will be meeting. Again, any questions, comments, because of the stuff I've given you individually, please let me know. So have a good one.